Ladies and gentlemen, if you are stood, can I invite you to make your way to a seat? Oh yeah, it was very quiet, very quick. You guys are amazing. It's great to have you here this evening. My name is Dave. I'm the rector here in Saxmundham, in Kelso and in Carlton. And you're here to see JB Gill, which is exciting. Yeah. Some of you are excited, some of you are not. Let's say you're here to see JB Gill. There we go. So we are starting a whole week of activities this evening. You'll see some people in blue jumpers that say Through Faith Mission. Afterwards, do speak to them, see what's going on. And we have a whole week of activities. There's posters at the back. So stay around, find out what we're doing this week. But enough of me. I'm going to hand over to Dave Bement. So Dave Bement works for the Lighthouse Agency, and he will explain who he is and what he's doing here. Thank you.
Lovely. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and lovely to be here. That's lovely. Right, we can hear me now. Yes. Good evening again, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Dave Bement. Most important thing, I'm a tractor boy. And I've got some of my granddaughters here, and they're tractor girls. We actually have got season tickets, and there are 2 tractor girls over there, and it's absolutely lovely to be here. Actually, I come from Essex. My daughter lives in Ipswich, and we've had the whole weekend. We were in Halesowen last night, and we were in Debenham this morning, and here this evening. And it's been we've had a lovely weekend, meeting you all, and it's, of course, Suffolk is a lovely, lovely place. So enough about that. I run an organisation called the Lighthouse Agency, and the Lighthouse Agency looks after sports people and celebrities who have a Christian faith, who have a life story, and they want to come out, they want to give some of their time to share their story with others in the hope that it might be helpful. And so we have a variety of guests, but tonight we've got a very special guest. We've got JB Gill. Now, JB Gill is part of JLS. In 2008, they applied to the X Factor. We'll see what happens later on. And since then, JB has also become a TV presenter of various programs on television. You probably saw him if you were watching The One Show on Friday evening. He was on there. He's a resident presenter on The One Show. Last year, he was in Strictly Come Dancing. We'll be showing you some of that as well. Now, when JLS first formed, within the first few years, they became one of the one of the best-known boy bands in the UK. They actually sold about 10 million records, which is not bad, and they had 5 number-1 hits. And then they disbanded in 2013. They reformed about 4 years ago and went on a UK tour, and they sold 300,000 seats on their UK tour. Their profile is very, very high, and obviously with all the JB's other activities as well, he is a very well-known person. Now, before I introduce him, we're going to watch 1 or 2 things that he's been doing during his career. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a very big hand to Mr. JB Gill.
Hello everyone, how are we?
How are we doing? All right? Had a busy day, haven't we?
We're good. It's been a busy day, but we are pleased to be here, and thank you for the wonderful welcome.
JB, thanks ever so much for coming along. You're going to take us through your life story and all the things that have happened to you. But I want to start off with just asking you what your background, what your childhood was like, where you were born, and what was your upbringing like?
Well, I was actually born here in the UK, and both my parents are from Caribbean descent. So I spent a lot of my early years until I was about 4 before I started primary school in the Caribbean. And then we moved to the UK, and I did most of my school, or had most of my school life here in the UK. And I had a great childhood, a great upbringing, got fond memories. It was just myself and my brother, of course, our parents. And yeah, as I say, it was a very, very good childhood. I grew up, I spent a lot of time in church growing up as well. Both especially my mum's side, we're very much of the Pentecostal tradition. I went to a Church of England school, so of course, always affiliated with that. And then I also did Cubs and Scouts as I got a bit older, and that was affiliated with the Catholic Church. So, we'd always sort of do parade days and things like that with them. And so for me, I was very much part of, as I say, a church upbringing, very knowledgeable. My great aunt, who is like my grandmother, also played that role because my grandmother passed before I was even born. So, she didn't have any children of her own. And so we kind of became her grandchildren. And, again, she'd been a child evangelist for many, many years, the best part of about 60 years. Unfortunately, she's now in care, but she's been a huge part of, of my faith journey, and certainly, as I say, for many years as an active part and played a huge role within sort of the Wesleyan Holiness Church up in Leicester, and across the world as well. So yeah, as I say, it was a good upbringing, and definitely rooted in Christianity.
Lovely. We're going to swap microphones actually, because I think yours is. I think this may be up a bit too loud. Whoever
there we
is
go.
doing I think that may be the part of the problem. That's lovely. Thank you ever so much. So when you were 13, you moved to Croydon. Did you still keep going to church at that time?
Yeah, I mean, periodically. I think certainly in my early years, I grew up in church, as I said, and we'd go to church. We lived not far from Brixton, and we go to church in Dulwich, which is kind of the next main sort of village on, so to speak. And that was probably about 20 minutes from home, and we're very much part of that local church community. Go to Sunday school there, and I was baptized there, and so on. And when we then moved to Croydon, I think we obviously didn't have the same connection to our community, but we did try and find various different churches there. But I think at that time, for the family, it was very much in sort of like the busyness of life. For those of you who've got families, I'm sure you understand what all that can be like, and whether it was work or personal activities or whatever it was, those sorts of things kind of took over a little bit. And I think we definitely didn't attend in the same consistency as when I was younger. But as I say, it was very much part of my life. We'd always attend sort of the big occasions. We'd be there at Christmas and Easter, and a lot of sort of the milestone celebrations, if you want to call it that, throughout the year. So as I say, it's very much part of my life.
And of course, during your teenage years, you had two loves, didn't you? Music and sport. Which took the preference?
Well, certainly in the early years, music was definitely a huge passion of mine. I think my mum must have seen some sort of gift in me, because I remember even before I could remember, I see pictures of myself as a baby, with drumsticks in my mouth and, tambourines and stuff all over the floor. And then, growing up, I remember, I played the recorder. So for anybody whose kids play the recorder, just hang in there. It'll be all right. I went and started playing the flute as well, and ended up attending the Centre for Young Musicians in London to study that and study the piano as well. At one point, I think I was playing about 4 instruments. I tried the guitar, didn't get on with it, but it's fine. So music was obviously a huge part of my life at that time. And then over the years, as I sort of attended secondary school and so on, sport definitely came a bit more to the fore. I've always loved sport. I've always been very active, outdoors playing and things like that. And so for, when I had the choice, or the option, should I say, whether to play for my school teams, and I love my football. I was into my rugby as well. That definitely kind of took over, especially as I started to have, I guess, a bit more success with that. And I think certainly from 13 till about 16, it was all about the sport.
And of course you did very well as well. You played rugby and you played for London Irish. Why did you stop playing rugby?
Yeah, like you say, I was playing sort of all throughout the schoolboy ranks, playing for London South East and Surrey, and played at school, of course, and was training at London Irish for about 2 or 3 years. When I was When I was 16, I got an ankle injury, and I did have aspirations for going into professional sport, but for one reason or another, I think, I wasn't quite the same player when I came back from that injury, and that kind of put paid to my ambition for a professional career within rugby, and probably for the right reasons. And I think around that time as well, I was sort of looking at my career options and whether I'd go to uni and how that all plays out, how that all looks. And it's around about the time when you got all the career advice people coming to school, and they're talking about what you're going to do next and how's it all going to work out. And I obviously still kept up with my music throughout that period anyway. And I think it was around the time where I was starting to discover what I was passionate about, and certainly from a musical perspective as well. It kind of almost came full circle again, where I was quite determined that music in some way, shape or form would become part of my potential career.
And you decided to go to university and study theology. Now, can you tell us what theology is, and why did you choose that?
Yeah, I mean, technically, theology is the study of God, for the course that I was doing, I went to King's College London. It was all based sort of around the church and Christianity, the history of the church, a lot of Christian doctrine, and then there were a few sort of modules chucked in there, like New Testament Greek and Judaism and ethics. All sorts of really, for me anyway, really exciting stuff. And one of the reasons why I chose that subject was because, close your ears if you're going to university, it was easy. And I knew I would leave with a decent degree. But no, all jokes aside, I absolutely loved it. Growing up, of course, as I say, I grew up in church, so a lot of that knowledge and that understanding was already there. And as I say, it gave me, I knew I wanted to be involved in music, but it gave me a little bit of time, really, to work out how that might play out. And as you can imagine, with any sort of entertainment industry, it's high risk, but, of course, high reward. So you never know, in fact, I know amazing singers, amazing musicians, amazing performers, better even than I am, who haven't made it. So, it's not an easy industry to get into, and I recognise that at quite an early age. So it was all about buying time. And I knew that if I did a subject that I loved, a subject that I was good at, I got a grade A at A-level, then it was probably going to end up with good news when I came to the end of my degree course.
But of course, during that time, you were still doing a lot of music.
Yes.
And then you joined JLS.
Yes.
What does JLS stand for? Because people often ask me that.
Does anyone know what JLS stands for? Go on, I dare you. Jack the Lad Swing, yes. Which is kind of a bit of a play on words. I mean, at the time when we first got together, we were looking at sort of our own styles of music and kind of what we wanted to produce and to write and to record. And so we kind of like based ourselves on sort of that new Jack Swing, style of R&B. And obviously we were Jack the Lads, pretty much from London. All of us apart from one, obviously Aston's from Peterborough, but, we were all living in London at the time, and we kind of just, during the X Factor, we had to kind of make a decision over what our name would be, and that stuck.
And of course, how did you join JLS?
Well, I was in I just finished actually my first year at university, and I was working with a vocal coach at the time, and they were actually, helping me with songwriting and all different, sort of aspects of music. And she had a couple other students who'd gone to the X Factor, and while she was there, she'd met with Arishe. For those of you who don't know, Arishe is the founding member of JLS, and he'd sort of said to her, I've got a group, I'm putting it together. Do you know anybody who might, sort of become a member. And so, you know, she gave me his details and said, I'll give him a call if you feel like it. So I did feel like it. I gave him a call and just, you know, spoke to him. He said, yeah, you know, I'm trying to put this group together. We're looking for one more member. Would you be interested? So I went to meet him, sat down, had a chat with him, sang to him, and he was like, yeah, like what you've got to offer. The other boys aren't here, Aston and Marvin, but, you know, I'd love for you to meet them as well, and then we can maybe see if we'll take it from there. So I met the other boys as well, and that was pretty much it, you know, and all throughout sort of my second year at uni, you know, we would be doing best unsigned act competitions and, you know, going to all the open mic nights and, you know, trying to make it, of course, in the music industry.
And then you applied for X Factor. Why did you do that?
Yeah, so we were at as I say, I just finished my second year at university, and I think we'd kind of just run out of resources, for want of a better term. You know, we'd spoken to pretty much everybody that we knew within the music industry to see how far that would get us. And I think we always had this idea of, I guess that, you know, the Hollywood, well, I say Hollywood, what's the alternative? The London way of getting into the industry, sort of, you know, that fairy tale of that you put your demo tape in, then, you know, the manager or the record label boss hears it and it's amazing, and then they sign you up, and then it's, you know, this brilliant sort of career in music. And, you know, of course, that may well have been some people's journey, but it wasn't ours, or certainly wasn't to be ours. And I think around that time, of course, you know, the X Factor was starting to gain traction, and, you know, you'd seen the success of people like Leona Lewis come through shows like that, Gareth Gate, you know, people like that who come through those reality TV shows and, you know, starting to have real success and actually be able to make a career and out of performing through those shows. And, you know, so many of our family and friends had encouraged us to you know, potentially pursue it, and it was very much a last resort for us, really. But the student loan doesn't go very far, as you can imagine. So we'd run out of money, basically, and yeah, it was an option that we had, and we took it.
I love that phrase, we've got low on resources. So in other words, if you're skint, apply to X Factor.
Yes, pretty much.
And you did apply for X Factor,
yeah.
And you did very well, and you got to the final of X Factor. Let's have a look at what happened then. How did that feel?
I'm still not over it. And I definitely don't talk to Alexandra Burke. No, I'm joking. Obviously, we're great friends. And yeah, you know, I was upset, of course, in that moment. And I think because we had no idea what would happen from that moment, you know, obviously everything was geared up to whether we would go on and win. And I think in a final, it's anybody's to win as well. You know, so of course we were excited to do that and, you know, managed to do it. But I think, you know, in hindsight, it was still a great opportunity for us. And I think ultimately that's what we'd done, you know, we did the show for, to have the opportunity to release our own music and, you know, potentially become fully fledged artists. So, you know, we kind of shifted focus at that moment, or just after that moment, should I say, and pretty much got straight to work.
And of course, people say coming second is a bit of an advantage because you're not tied in with so many contractual arrangements with X Factor. Did you find that?
Well, I think for us, you know, I think what a lot of people say that the people who come second do better on the show, but I think a lot of it boils down to the obligations of the winner, you know, and so the winner then has to promote that first single, you know, whatever you sing on the night, and that usually went on to go and become the Christmas #1, and, you know, that was amazing, but then they'd have to wait almost a year until the next series of the X Factor started before they could perform their next single, so to speak, live on the show on the first episode. So, you know, it was quite a long period of time between releasing the first single and then obviously then being able to debut and promote the second single. Whereas for us, you know, that was a year where Simon Cowell said he was only going to sign the winner, so he only signed Alexandra Burke that night. And we did end up getting a record deal, but we didn't have the same restraints in terms of having to wait for a new series to come along. You know, we released our first single, I think, in the July of that year, and then we went on to release our second single, Everybody in Love, which you know, we were obviously then performed on the show, and all throughout that period prior to July, so from January all the way through pretty much, we were up and down the country touring and, doing radio shows and interviews and effectively getting in front of the people. We went on tour 2 or 3 times, supported Lamar, and, we did loads of different bits and pieces, I think, in front of the audience who'd been voting for us, all throughout the show. And that was a really good thing for us, and we were able to work on our own music. And I think, ultimately what allows any artist to do well is to have a real clear idea of who you are and what you want to do, and so if other people come in and say, oh, how about this, and you're just like, nope, that's not what we're going for, this is what it looks like, then you've got a much better chance of success, I think. And we were very driven, worked very hard, and I think obviously being able to have a bit more freedom with what we wanted to make and sing was also beneficial.
And really, despite coming second, all you guys suddenly went from zero to hero, and you were never off the telly, and everyone was talking about you. How did you cope with that, and how did your faith at that time cope with that?
Yeah, like you say, it was very quick, a very quick turnaround, and we've gone from effectively, being unknown. I remember one time, we did that final week, we did our homecoming gig, and we went to Fairfield Halls, which is in Croydon, which is local to me, to where I live and where I grew up. I performed there before, at school events and school choir performances. And I remember we did the homecoming gig, and when I say to you it was gridlocked, I mean you literally could not move. Kids had left school at like 2 o'clock after lunch just to try and get down to the performance when they knew that we were going to be there. You couldn't drive in. It took us almost 2 hours. We were 2 hours late to stage. It's the first time we've ever been late on stage. And that was because you couldn't drive around sort of the one-way system that's there. And I think that was the first time we really recognized and realized just how impactful our journey had been on the show and kind of what we had in store for us. And after the final, it was very quick, very fast-paced. The schedule was relentless. I was traveling all the time, but ultimately, it was what we wanted to do. That's what we've been gearing towards. We had, hardly any responsibilities, just 4 young guys living our dream. And so for me, it was a very busy time, and certainly in terms of my faith, there almost wasn't any time for it. I didn't even have time to breathe, let alone, attend church or anything like that. And I definitely say, I never disregarded my faith. I've never been, had a phase of life where, I've not believed in God or, sort of questioned my overall beliefs. But in terms of, how I would live my life, it wasn't reflective of my faith at all, to be very honest with you. So, it's definitely a lot further away from that during that time. But one of the things that I always appreciate is having, great family around me, and obviously being able to do the journey with the boys as well. All 3 of them are similarly minded to me. So although it was very difficult and there was lots going on, actually, we were well supported.
And really, I suppose God did give you little nudges from time to time and say, I'm still here. But there was one incident that you had in Scotland that probably stands out a little bit. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so, I mean, as you say, Dave, all throughout that period, it was quite relentless. But, I'd go and visit my great aunt, as I mentioned, and she was up in Leicester whenever I had a bit of time off. I'd go and see her, and she'd always leave me with a parting gift or parting message to say, stay close to Jesus. And I'd be like, yes, I know, Aunt Jay. And, then I'd go back to like a million miles, running around like a headless chicken with the boys. And then I'd go and see her again. And, like you mentioned, I went up to Scotland. I think I was doing a radio tour, something like that. And as you can imagine, there's lots of fans that come all around the country, if not the world, to come and see us doing various different bits and pieces. And, there were some fans there from Scotland, and they gave me a gift. And they said, don't open this now. Open it in your hotel room. I'm like, okay, what's in this gift? Anyway, I listened to them, went to my room, that evening, and opened it up. There was a note in there, which is from them. And, long story short, they basically just said, we've, felt moved to give you this gift because, we've I don't know if they'd heard me say, a few things or talk about my faith at some point, and they had been praying about it in their youth group, and they wanted to give it to me, to just strengthen me on the road. And so, I opened it up, and inside was a Bible, which wasn't a shock really to me. I've had many Bibles myself, and of course studied theology and all the rest of it. But it was, like you say, just sort of a little prod, a little nudge to say, as busy as you are with everything else that's going on, actually this is just as important. And it came at a time where I was sort of questioning. As I say, I was very much in the thick of my career and, the peak of JLS, and everything's busy. When I would go and sort of challenge myself, to say, okay, well, what's going on with your faith? It's very difficult because, at that time you're just like, well, how do I can't undo all the stuff that I'm doing. Like, I'm having a successful career, and I'm doing what I'm supposed to do, and following my dreams, and, also living out, utilizing my gifts. But how then, of course, a lot of the music industry can be contradictory to, what Christianity is all about. So, it was definitely a time of discovery, and it was a great motivator, I suppose, for me to reestablish my personal faith.
And the lovely thing is, many years later, we went up to Scotland, and we went to those girls' church. They led the service, and we took part, and it was absolutely lovely, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Really, like almost a full circle.
Yeah, absolutely. Not too dissimilar to an event like this. We went up there, spent the morning with them, and it's lovely to kind of. So I think it was their youth. The youth put the event on, so it was nice that they'd obviously sort of been praying for me at that time, and then sort of almost what was it? Probably would have been about 10 years later. I was able to go up and be part of their event. So it was very special.
Now, JLS had many early hits. They've had hits since, but they had some very early hits. We're going to watch a few of them. We can't watch them all because there's so many, but we're going to watch a few of your early hits. Now, around that time, you met a lady who was going to ultimately become your wife, Chloe. How did you meet her?
So Chloe was a dancer on the same series of X Factor, of course, that we did, and it was our first, commercial job. And I don't know what was in the water that week, but we'd had dancers previously on the show, and week 6 seems to be the one that secured or sealed the deal, so to speak. So, but yeah, obviously we met on the show, and sort of all throughout that first year after the show, as I mentioned, we were going on tour. She was going on tour as well. We were performing alongside each other at shows like T4 on the Beach, and Big Weekend, and the Brits or whatever. And she was also performing but dancing with other artists and so on. So it was actually quite nice to have her support, and someone who understood the industry, was doing similar things to myself, starting out almost on a similar playing field, and we were able to support each other, because she didn't actually dance for us as a group. She was on sharing a similar stage, so we'd always be able to sort of catch the end of her one before we went on stage, or vice versa. So it's nice to be able to have that support from her. And of course, years later we got married, and the rest is history, as they say.
And of course, years later, you were able to dance together, and we've got a VT on it, on a program called Dance, 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 and here's the two of you dancing together. Now, in 2013, JLS disbanded, and so you started to get involved in other things. And one of the things you did get very involved in was to become a farmer. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. I mean, that was definitely a period of massive change, as you can imagine. Apologies to anyone who's a massive fan who was scarred at those announcements of us to disbanding. But, what a lot of people don't realize, I think, is that when you're in a group, everything sort of focuses and centers around the group, and it's slightly different to work in a business or at a company, or having a job where you're working as part of a team, because ultimately you're making individual decisions even though you're plugging into the team. When we're being part of JLS, no matter what I do for the rest of my life, I'll always be in JLS, which is great, and I love representing that, but it's also sort of gives you almost a sense of you're always representing, you're always working, and certainly throughout that process, things are very much all-encompassing, and at the time, it was, you'd miss birthdays, you'd miss weddings, you miss funerals, you miss sort of seeing your family members and so on, and there's a lot to sacrifice. And for me personally as well, you always feel like you let the side down if you're not able to do something, or do you know what I mean, if you're not contributing in the way that you normally would, and so there's a lot to put into it, a lot to sacrifice. And similarly, sort of coming out of that, it was then a case of, all right, we've been together for the best part of about 8 years. I think it was from conception all the way through that point, achieved so many incredible things, and it was the right time really for us to, I guess, establish ourselves as individuals, and work out what we wanted to do individually. And we were the first X Factor act to ever complete the record deal, which is a 4-album deal. So it'd never been done before, effectively, and we just felt it was the right time for us to step out, and if we wanted to pursue individual music pursuits, we wouldn't have the idea of, do you know what, we've got to still deliver 2 albums in order to make this all work, and the record label are begging us to finish a new album and all that sort of stuff. And it was the perfect time to sort of separate and do pursue individual things. And as I say, 7 years, 8 years is a long time when you're in a group, and you're doing stuff every single day, non-stop. So it was the right time really for us to call it a day, and we had no idea that we'd come together at a future date, and so effectively I wanted to work on things that I was passionate about, and I started out sort of early days, of course, when I left my family home, moved to where we live now, which has about 20 acres, so it's a small holding really, but I was passionate about farming. As I mentioned, I grew up in the Caribbean, and so that connection to where my food came from, and some of my family members used to would work sort of as the village baker, and would be go fishing and things like that, and so that understanding and that proximity to nature and to where your food came from was very, very strong. And ultimately I wanted to be resourceful, there's that word again, but we had the land, we had the space, so what could I do with it? And of course I started setting up the farm as a pig farm, went to go and see people like Jimmy Doherty and Adam Henson and get loads of advice and stuff, very quickly. I mean, it started out as more of a passion project, and I wanted to be a very purist farmer. We were going to do this and that and everything else in between, and very quickly, my family sort of encouraged me not to, I guess, disregard the previous almost 10 years within entertainment, and actually utilize that as a tool, and so many people that I'd met along the way, in that transition period, other farmers and growers and producers and so on, basically said, it's such a great thing that you're doing. We have the farms, but we don't have the platform that you have to talk about it and raise awareness, and it was, at the time, it was relatively new. There were only a small number of people who, had any sort of television profile or whatever, that were involved in farming. And of course, sort of fast forward another 5-10 years, you've got Clarkson's farm and Springtime on the Farm, but I was the pioneer. Okay, no, but honestly, obviously I'm joking, but all of it helps. But ultimately, I was very passionate about doing something that I, as I say, was really passionate about, but also felt, was important for our society.
And not only did you do that, you started doing TV, did various other projects as well. And we're just going to have a look at some of the things that you did after your time with JLS. Now, during that time, I mean, obviously you were doing TV, you were doing farming, and also I think you were going through a period where sort of you were re-evaluating your faith. How did that sort of develop?
I mean, for during that period, of course, it is, as I say, a period of huge transition and change, and that was around the time where, obviously I've been with Chloe, my wife, well, she wasn't my wife at the time. We've been together for probably about 3 or 4 years at that point, and, of course, starting to have those conversations about what does the future hold, when will we get married and all that sort of stuff, and if we got married, will we have children? And so for me, it was definitely a time really to focus a bit more on myself, you know, and I definitely had that space from a career perspective, and of course personally as well, you know, is a massive change as well. We got married and, you know, had our firstborn Ace, our son, you know, just after that, and yeah, you know, it was definitely something that I wanted to focus more on. And prior to us getting married, you know, I spoke to Chloe about it, you know, and basically had to reach out to a family member, because at the time, of course, I was at the peak of JLS fame, you know, and I didn't feel that comfortable, if I'm honest, going into, you know, a random church building with people that I didn't know, and sort of introducing myself and not knowing whether they were there for me, or, you know, whether they just wanted to meet someone famous or whatever. And, you know, as I'm sure for any of you who come here regularly, you know, it can become, it is an extension of family, you know, and you know, I didn't necessarily want to talk about personal things with people that I didn't know. So anyway, I got in touch with a family member and just said to him, listen, I want to try and find, you know, a church community, somewhere that's relatively local. You know, as you can imagine at the time as well, the consistency wasn't easy, because if I was working away or filming or doing whatever, you know, of course that would be slightly disruptive. And I didn't have sort of a regular job where I had weekends off every single weekend or whatever. So it was quite tough. But I ended up speaking to a gentleman who became my pastor, a guy called Jonathan McGill. For those of you who don't know, the J in JB stands for Jonathan. Of course, my last name's Gill. So I was like, that's a divine sign. And, you know, obviously ended up speaking to him and introduced him to Chloe. And, you know, we ended up attending the church, which is still our church today, Bromley Town Church. And, you know, it's great to be able to connect with a community, you know, because it had been a long time since I'd really had that. You know, and for me, of course, you know, as I say, I was thinking about getting married. We did a marriage course there. We did Alpha there with Chloe's sister. And she came, you know, she did have a faith growing up, but she came from a Catholic background, so it's very different to sort of my Pentecostal upbringing. And so it was really nice for us both to kind of share a bit of that journey as well together prior to us then getting married and starting a family.
Yeah, I'm interested in what you said about Alpha, because we talked about that a lot this weekend at the different churches we've been to. What is Alpha exactly?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm no expert, but loosely speaking, you know, an Alpha course was really important to me. And effectively, it's kind of like that first step into understanding more about Christianity. For a lot of people, perhaps, who, you know, don't come from a church background, you know, it's a great place and a great way for people to ask questions, you know, whether it's about their existence, whether it's about Jesus, about God, about the Holy Spirit, you know, lots of things, you know, a lot of terms that are thrown around in churches that can be pretty daunting for a lot of people. Interestingly for me, of course, I grew up around that. So I wasn't, you know, I was never really sort of, you know, overwhelmed by any of those topics or those conversations. But it was a great way for me to cement what I believed, and sort of re-establish my personal connection, you know, talking with people who had no background whatsoever, you know, and lots of topics would come up and I would sort of learn a bit more, and as I say, it was a great way for me to sort of like reconnect, and it was great to do it with Chloe as well, who's coming from a slightly different perspective, and her sister, and as I say, it's a great stepping stone, you know, with people who perhaps, as I say, don't maybe even know as much as you, or perhaps not as much as you, for you to be able to explore any questions that you might have about Christianity.
So at that time, you did Alpha and you got married. And then 4 years ago, JLS reformed. How did that come about?
Yeah, so it was just before lockdown, and I remember speaking to all the different boys, and you know, for me, ultimately, it was all about timing. You know, I remember prior to having children, I was always quite adamant that I didn't want to have children at the height of JLS, because, especially with a young family, you know, I always wanted to be a very hands-on dad, or as hands-on as I could be, and I didn't want to miss, you know, sort of those early milestones. Those children grow way too quickly, you know, and I wanted to be around to see them walking and, you know, taking their first steps, going into nursery, whatever, all that sort of stuff. And you know, my children were a little bit older when we started having those conversations, and you know, I prayed about it. I spoke to my wife about it, spoke to other family members about it, and it was a great, you know, it was a good time for us as a family. to sort of, begin those conversations again. And we knew we had something incredibly special with the group. And I think at the time, for everybody, it was positive discussions. Of course, at that time, we then went into a lockdown just after we'd announced the first tour, so we had to wait another year and a half before we could actually get on the road. But yeah, I mean, again, that happened at the perfect time, and yeah, that kind of opened the gateway to, I guess, a second lease of life on JLS.
And to launch JLS again, you launched a new record, and it was called Eternal Love, and that was written by Ed Sheeran. Now, he's a tractor boy as well, of course.
Come on.
To say that. But how did you get Ed to write you a song?
Well, we met him a number of times over the years, and of course we were massive fans of his work, and likewise he, was a massive fan of our work as well. And we did that typical thing that artists do when we meet each other, and we go like, yeah, we should get in the studio, we should work. And it never happens. But yeah, obviously we've always been, admirers of his work. And when we'd announced that we were going to reform, we spoke to a lot of producers that we'd worked with, a lot of the songs that you've seen already this evening. And, we got in touch with a producer who did Beat Again and a couple of our other singles as well. And just said to him, listen, obviously we're releasing new music. We'd love to work with you again. Sort of what you're saying. And he was obviously very enthusiastic and said he's working with Ed Sheeran at the time, and Ed would love to write a song for you guys. Would you be open to it? So yeah, obviously he wrote Eternal Love. We heard it, and it made perfect sense. It was a great song, and obviously went on to be a good hit for us.
And you missed out on one of his other songs, didn't you?
Yeah, as I say, Ed's been a massive fan of ours for a long time, and I think on stage one time he said that he wrote Lego House for us. And to this day, we still haven't heard the version that apparently was sent. And had we heard it, it probably would have been a massive hit for us instead of him. But obviously it went to him in the end, and rightly so.
So let's have a look at Eternal Love, and also another song which is called Postcard, that was launched again at that time. Let's just have a look at both of them. Now, as well as JLS, you were recently on another quite well-known programme, Strictly, last year. How did you get onto Strictly?
I actually changed TV agents midway through last year. And actually, it was very, well, I wouldn't say accidental, but it was very last minute. And I had no idea I was going to do this show until probably the end of July. And at the time, I was actually on tour with JLS. We were doing a summer tour, actually at Newmarket. I don't know if a few of you came to the show. Yeah, I see a few nods in the audience. But yeah, it was obviously a busy time for us at the time. And my agent basically said, would you consider doing the show? Now, of course, you saw a clip there earlier of me doing the Christmas special, and I absolutely loved that whole experience. And it was always something that I'd wanted to do, but for one reason or another, it wasn't the right time, and wasn't able to do it. And I basically said to my agent, I'm still on tour, but if we can kind of make it work, then we'll see what happens. And I went into the audition, so to speak. I danced with one of the professionals, and they were like, yeah, we would love to have you on the show. Can you do this date, this date, this date, this date, this date? And I had a freak out, and I was just like, well, I don't know. I've got to go and check. And again, call it timing or divine, whatever you want to call it. For me, it just ticked all the boxes, and I was able to actually do every single date that they suggested. And I just knew that if it was either going to be then or never. Typically, the end of the year is always filled up with touring or other bits and pieces, lots of filming and stuff like that. So last year was the year where it all clicked and it worked, and there we were.
And it's quite difficult for you, wasn't it? Because you had to change partners halfway through. Amy became ill, and you suddenly had to change partners. How difficult was that, dancing with a different partner?
Yeah, it was very difficult, to be honest. Of course, I started the journey with Amy, and to dance with any other partner anyway, is going to be difficult, because you're dancing with someone who dances differently, who learns differently, feels different, all of that. And, these aren't just sort of simple dances where you're following routines, which is what I was, used to. You know, you're in a hold, and it's very technical, and you could spend a whole lifetime learning how to do any type of ballroom or Latin dance and still not be an expert. So, you know, it wasn't easy, but you know, obviously when I realized that Amy wasn't able to come back again, you know, I was you know, very much gutted, but you know, she'd laid a great foundation, and Lauren was a brilliant dancer as well, so it was good to sort of learn from her. And all the producers, of course, you know, came to me and said, this is the situation, this has happened. I had no idea how it would play out, but you know, I continued to give 110% every week and ended up in the final. So no complaints in the end.
Yes. Let's have a look at some of the takes from your dances. Now, not only are you a singer and a dancer and a presenter, but you're also an author. And you've written a couple of books. Do tell us about those books.
Absolutely. I mean, again, another passion of mine, which I've been able to sort of, again, shoehorn even, that's the word, into my career. It's always been a passion of mine even to write. And, you know, growing up in school, English is always one of my favorite subjects. And, you know, I was always into creative writing stories and, you know, coming up with different rhymes, writing poetry, all that sort of stuff. And you know, I had an idea before Ace was born, actually, to write a children's book. You know, and I had the aspiration that obviously when my children were born, then I'd be able to read it to them and so on. And sort of I came up with this story loosely based around farming and sort of, I guess, that sort of backdrop, and came up with it, tried to get it published. For one reason or another, it didn't get published, and it kind of sort of went, you know, back on the shelf as an idea. And then Ace was born, and I sort of revisited it again, and spoke to my manager at the time and agents and book agents and stuff, and tried to get it published. Again, it didn't get published, and it wasn't until during lockdown where I had a different book agent, and you know, they saw the story and they said, "Oh, we love this. It's a great idea. Let's see what we can do." And Penguin actually came back and said, "Oh, we love the idea of this, but at the moment it's in sort of a picture book form. We want it to be like a proper sort of like early readers book, you know." And they wanted me to write, I think, another 30,000 words. So I was just like, okay. But no, I love writing, so you know, it wasn't an issue. And at that time, I only had Ace, so that's how it ended up. The series ended up being called Ace and the Animal Heroes. You know, and I was like, "Are you sure you want me to write this story about you?" He's like, "Yes, of course, Daddy." So I did, and then my daughter came along. And she was like, "Where's my book?" But no, I ended up, at the time, again, it wasn't published just yet. And so I added a couple of characters. And ultimately, it's about Ace, this little boy who moves to sort of a rural community from the city, and meets sort of a new group of friends. And Bear, who's the character loosely based around my daughter, becomes his best friend. And, you know, they kind of all club together in the first book, The Big Farm Rescue, to sort of fix up this farm that they'd taken over in order to get it ready for a big inspection. And then the second book, you know, I was able to write as well, was all about the weather. It's called The Wacky Weather Mystery. And of course, by that point, the farm that we had, you know, was very much established. And, you know, I wanted to write a story that was obviously fictional and fun and the kids would love, but, you know, was also centered around one of the things which I think has such a, you know, it's a massive impact on our farming community and the growers and producers that, you know, that help to get our food to our plates. But a lot of people just don't even think about it, you know, and take it for granted. And I think it was during lockdown where we started to really appreciate sort of the job that our farming community do, and you know, the food that we have available here in the UK. And as I say, it was a great way to kind of talk about something which is massively impactful, such as the weather and all the different types of weather that we get here in the UK. And that story is all about you know, Ace and Bear and the farm squad all, you know, get into grips with the changes in the weather and how they can manage it all for the big harvest at the end of the story.
And what age is it for?
Well, it's for I guess early readers. So if you've got a really strong reader, my daughter's just turned 7. She read it when she was 6. So you know, if you've got a 6-year-old who's really, really confident with their reading, then it's perfect for them. and I'd say you're probably looking at around about 11. My son would read it, but he's kind of moved on to, The Wind in the Willows and some of those, bigger books now. But yeah, obviously anybody can read it, but I'd say it's sort of that first chapter book, early readers.
Now, we've got them, believe it or not, on sale tonight. So if you would like to get a copy of the book afterwards, each book is £7.50. We do have a slight problem in we haven't got the reader machine with us tonight. So if you do want to buy it, it's either cash or a bank transfer. But come and see, there's our tractor girls will be there afterwards selling the book. So do come and JB will be happy to sign it for you. Now, we've got a few more questions, but also I want to just talk about two other things. After we finish tonight, JB will be staying here as long as we need to. He'll be happy to have selfies. If you don't want a book, don't worry. Still come and see him. Happy to do selfies, sign autographs, etc. And we've got a couple more questions. And I've been asking all the questions tonight. And then it's going to be your turn. So you can ask JB anything you like. And his wife has told me that make the questions as hard as you like. So there we go. So have a think. And when we've finished the main part of the evening, then we'll have 15, 20 minutes where you can ask him anything you like about his faith, about his life, about anything, about JLS, whatever you like. So be having a think and seeing if there's anything you really would like to ask. Now, I just want to ask a couple of other things, JB, because throughout this evening, you've talked about your Christian faith. What actually is the Christian faith?
Well, I mean, being a Christian is ultimately about being Christ-like and following in the example of Jesus Christ. And, we get a real clear picture of what Jesus Christ is like through the Gospels, which is the first four books of the New Testament in the Bible. And ultimately, that's what it's all about, And, one of the things that I always say, there's lots of people, like myself, who grew up in church, and went to church with their parents and with their families. And ultimately, it's a personal decision, Just because you grew up in church doesn't necessarily make you a Christian. And I certainly got to the stage in life where, as much as I knew a lot and I'd been around the environment, actually I had to make a conscious decision. What do I stand for? What am I about? What sort of things do I want to represent? What do I want to teach my children? And as I say, that was sort of the turning point for me in terms of reaffirming my Christian faith. But I always say you behave how you believe, So if it's something that you believe in, then ultimately your life should reflect that. And, I'll just give a quick example of that. When we were doing Dance, 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 which you saw there, I remember my wife and I, we would sit down, in sort of like this big canteen, and, we'd have our lunch or our dinner or whatever, and we'd always pray over our food. And we weren't doing it to be showy. It was just something that we'd committed to do as we were, together and on the road and so on. And, it's probably about, I think we're doing the show for about 10 weeks, filming it out in Amsterdam. And probably week 6 or 7, we sat down, said our prayer over our food, just to give thanks for our food. One of the other contestants just turned around and looked at us and said, "What are you doing? Why are you doing that?" And we just explained, well, we're just, giving thanks for our food. And it was a real opportunity then to open up about our faith and what it meant to us and why we did it. And, often, as I say, that can, lead to opportunities then to share your faith and talk about it. But ultimately, if you don't demonstrate what you supposedly believe, then it's a lot more difficult for people to sort of connect with you and to understand what you do. So ultimately, I went off path a little bit, but ultimately, as I say, being a Christian is following in the example and the footsteps of Jesus Christ.
And finally, what has helped you most in your Christian walk over the years? What has helped you most, would you think?
I think there's been a few things, of course, that have helped me. I'd say two of the most important things for me, certainly in terms of, my Christian faith, would be prayer. over the years, certainly in recent years, when I'm making decisions about what work I should do and, the decisions that I should make in life, sometimes quite life-changing decisions. We're just about to enter a new one because my son, as I mentioned, is slightly older than my daughter. He's just about, going to be 11 next week, and we're in 11 plus season where he's doing exams for schools and all that sort of stuff, and we don't know what the next sort of chapter is going to hold for him, and so us praying about that both individually as his parents, but then as a family as well, is really, really important. And throughout my time within JLS, it's been very important for me personally, but also not just from a Christian, from me in my Christianity and that perspective, but I've had my mum who's been supporting me in prayer, even though I had wouldn't necessarily know about it, and my great aunt as well, as I mentioned, within that grandmother role. I know for many years where I wasn't professing my own personal faith, she was definitely praying, and her church community were definitely praying, and so many people around the world even praying for us, for our protection, our success, and so on, so many other things. And I think it's something that you don't necessarily realize. Sometimes you can take for granted, but it's incredibly important. And I think it's one of the reasons why, although the music industry can be a difficult industry to be in, there's lots of pitfalls. I don't need to tell you all about some of the negative things that can come out of the industry. We've been through it and come out of it pretty much unscathed, if you can call it that. So I've definitely had the support of prayer, and that's been a massive thing for me. And then similarly for me personally, with my own walk, reading my Bible, I'll be honest, it's not easy. I'll do something like this, or be working, filming, and I'll get to my hotel room and it's, 11, 12 o'clock at night, and the last thing I want to do is sit and read Leviticus. Do you know what I mean? For those of you who don't know, Leviticus is a book in the Bible. It's a lot, but it's good. We appreciate Leviticus as much as the other books of the Bible. But all jokes aside, it's not easy to get into some of the texts, and so it's all well and good, obviously, when you have the time to do it. But when you have a busy life, you've got kids, you've got this, you've got all the stuff going on. It's not an easy thing to do, but it's so important, because if you want to know about what God's like, then we have to study his word. And in the Bible, it tells us all about what God's like, what Jesus is like, and it gives you so much information from that perspective. And, the great thing is that nowadays, you've got Bible apps, and you've got, all these sort of podcasts and whatever, things that can read you text and all that sort of stuff. So, for someone like my wife, who doesn't particularly enjoy reading, it's great for her to still be able to access that. And so, as I say, that's a massive thing for me in terms of, getting strength when you're down, and, when you go, for anybody who perhaps might suffer from depression or, anything like that, there's so many different things that you can read through those, through the Bible, through those words, that can give you strength and, help you along your journey. And then I'd say as well, prior to both of those things, it's just to reach out to someone that that's kind of how I was able to reestablish my faith. I spoke to a family member, and that was able to help me to connect to a church family. And similarly, for those of you who may be here for the first time, there's some wonderful people here as part of the church that you could speak to, or perhaps you came with someone who attends the church. Again, you could speak to them. And it's a great starting point, without sort of going into depth and, becoming an actual member of the church. It's a good starting point just to speak to somebody about anything you're concerned about, maybe try an Alpha course or something similar, I don't know, and just to, as I say, engage in that way.
Well, JB, thank you so much. Thank you for being so honest tonight and taking us through your life story. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give JB a good round of applause.
Thank you.
Right. Yeah, can you shout out then?
You'll project. How did I know that question was coming? Close your ears if you're going to university. I am technically a dropout. No, all jokes aside, of course, I completed my second year. I did pass it, So that's a saving grace. But of course, I deferred a year to do the show. And the rest, as I say, is history. Went on to have the success that we had. So I didn't actually complete my degree. But it's funny, I went back to King's College, which is where I studied, and I did or presented an event for them, actually, and hosted an awards evening. And I made that joke about being a dropout. And actually, it was the dean who sort of had the closing remarks. And he just said to me, you didn't drop out. Actually, you left at the right time. And ultimately, university is a gateway, for everybody. Of course, for a lot of people, you need to complete your degree to go on to, work in medicine or government or whatever it is that your plans are. And for me, of course, it was the gateway to my musical career. And, ultimately, he said the business of universities is developing people to contribute to our society. So I took a lot of heart from that. I didn't complete my degree, but you never know. One day I might go back. I'm still deferred, so we'll see. Ooh. I suppose I always go to Proverbs, and I love the Proverbs in general. I just think they're, such great scriptures, and I always go to trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not unto your own understanding. I see some excited. It's great, isn't it? In all your ways acknowledge him so that he will direct your path. And as I say, for me personally, it's such an important couple of verses, because I'm in an industry where decisions are made very quickly and they have a massive impact on, the future. And, I always kind of now I would never do anything or choose anything without praying about it, consulting my family, my wife, of course, and considering its impact on the future for myself, but also for the family and for the children. So, that's definitely one that I come back to. Proverbs 3, verse 5 to 6. Yeah.
Any more? There's one.
Well, there's less now than there were. No, all jokes aside, again, I mean, to be honest, this is one of the reasons why I was so proud to be a part of JLS, because, in the early days when, of course, we were young men and pretty much, unattached in that sense, it was never about the fame and, the adulation and the girls or anything like that. And to be honest with you, I think had that been the case for the other boys, I probably would never have joined the group, because I was very adamant that this is all about music, and you turn up on time to rehearsals and you work hard, and this is what we're aiming towards, and we're very ambitious, and the boys all shared the same sentiment. So for us, it was very much work first, and of course, as I say, it's high risk but it's high reward, so you get all the rewards that come with it, but the focus had never really ever been on that, and I suppose for that reason, as I mentioned, I met my girlfriend, or went on to become my girlfriend quite early on within my career, and we've gone on to get married, and obviously we've been married 11 years this year, 12 years next year, so we've been able to establish a family and so on, and for me, I've always just taken it with a pinch of salt. It's amazing, and as I say, it's interesting. Actually, I joked about it. There's less now than there were. For me, as I say, the focus has never really been on anything to do with that. And as quickly as it comes, it can also go. And so for me, I understand and value, or should I say, I understand what is valuable. And, certainly having a family, when all the opportunities end and, I can't even stand on a stage, I'll hopefully, God willing, have my family around me. And that's kind of my focus.
Any other questions?
Okay, well, I hope I'm not going to be judged too harshly, but it's a John Deere 2850. Is that okay? Do I get a thumbs up or is it? Okay, yeah. That's a good question. I actually came to grips with it prior to us even coming to an end. You know, I knew from very early days that something like JLS was never going to last. You know, and I'd say to the boys all the time, you know, we have to give 110%, you know, we have to do as much as we can, but we always have to prepare for that eventuality. And you know, especially for things, as I mentioned, you know, being involved in a group, you know, it has to run its course. It has to come to an end because it's for individuals who always have to be on the same page. You know, and we are individuals, we're all different ages, we've got different families, we've got different needs, we've got different, you know, we go through different experiences, you know, and ultimately, as I say, I knew from quite an early stage that it wouldn't last forever, you know, and we had our ambitions. And as I say, you know, for us, the reason why we ended up calling it a day when we did was because we'd completed everything. We'd done, you know, we'd fulfilled our record deal. We'd won Brits Awards, we won MOBO Awards. We traveled all around the world. We released, you know, #1 singles, #1 albums. You know, we'd done a lot of what you can do within the music industry, especially, and as I say, it was just the right time. And so for me, although the thing that I struggled with the most was working out what I would do next, and that was quite a big decision because I'd gone from being in this group where stuff was happening every single day, there was hardly any downtime, to pretty much having free reign with what I wanted to do. And as you know, that was kind of when I really channeled that into the farm, and you know, what I wanted to establish there, and then kind of bringing that back into entertainment with my TV work, doing Down on the Farm and Springtime on the Farm, and you know, all the other TV projects that I've been doing and continue to do as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Obviously, you saw a couple of clips there with my work of Songs of Praise, and I've done various different bits and pieces with them over the years. And you know, I would love to release gospel music. I've always said that if I was to do that, it would have to be firstly at the right time, but also with the right people. It's not just about, you know, getting in a studio and working with producers, you know, to produce music. It's got to be the right message and the right thing at the right time. And I haven't quite worked that out just yet, but yeah, no doubt, I would love to do that at some point in the future.
Good. Just one more question, if we could, please, and then we'll.
That's a good point. Oh, you put me on the spot now. Yeah, no. Do you know what? I think for me, I think it's my work, and this is kind of a bit of a cheat because, you know, it spans across a few things. But my work with children, you know, for me, that gives me the most joy. You know, I go into schools and I might do like a presentation with the books, and you know, you see some of these, you know, to see these kids who, you know, got someone come into their school, and it's very exciting. And you know, you do shows like Down on the Farm, and I do a family show with my own kids called Cooking with the Gills. I'm sure some of you might have seen that for Channel 5. And you know, I go and I work with various different people for lots of, you know, whether it's TV or music or whatever, you know, and I firmly believe that our children will become the next, or will be in the next positions of power. You know, they'll be standing here, you know, giving these interviews in 5, 10, 15 years' time. They'll be, you know, running churches and running governments and running businesses, and, you know, being on stage and doing incredible things. And I think genuinely nothing gives me more joy than being able to give a bit of myself and my experience and my you know, background back to them, and kind of seeing what, you know, where that takes them. You know, I always say I'll meet obviously so many people doing events like this and other things as well within my career, and I won't remember everybody, you know, and every encounter that I'll have, but what I say and my reaction to them and my interaction with them, you know, will last a long time. You know, sometimes I'll go to a place where no one will have gone. you know, and I'll be the only person that went there, and perhaps that inspires them to go on and do something incredible in the future. I don't know, but, you know, that gives me a lot of joy. It's amazing.
JB, thank you so much. Let's give JB a big hand before we hand back to David. Thank you, JB.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much for this evening. Thank you all for coming. Don't run away, though, because you're about to sell books and sign books and all of that stuff. So do stay around. Now, JB, throughout this evening, has mentioned Alpha, and we will be running an Alpha starting in October. So if that's something that you thought, actually, yeah, that's for me. I want to know more. I want to ask questions about Jesus and God and faith. Do sign up for our Alpha that starts in October. Or if you really want to, stay around this evening, chat to anyone that kind of looks like they know what they're doing. Hang around and have a chat with us. There's a few of us around. But yeah, do stay. And I would love to end this evening. We're in a church, so will you oblige me? I'm going to pray. So if you'd like to close your eyes, that helps people sometimes when they pray. And if you agree with what I say, at the end you can say amen, which just means I agree. So let's pray. Loving God, we thank you for the gift of music, for the gift of children and the media. We thank you for JB and Dave for coming and sharing with us this evening. We pray they'll have a safe journey home, and we pray that we will have a great sleep and a wonderful day tomorrow. Amen. Excellent. Let's give them one more round of applause.